The National Press Club of Australia, caving to the Israel lobby, cancels my talk on our betrayal of Palestinian journalists. The National Press Club of Australia cancelled my talk on how the media, by amplifying Israeli lies, have betrayed Palestinian journalists, 278 of whom have been assassinated by Israel. Written by Chris Hedges for the Chris Hedges Report, chrishedges.substack.com. Read by Eunice Wong. I was scheduled to give a talk at the National Press Club of Australia on October 20th, called The Betrayal of Palestinian Journalists. It was to focus on the amplification of Israeli lies in the press, which most reporters know are lies, betraying Palestinian colleagues who are slandered, targeted, and killed by Israel. But, perhaps inadvertently proving my point, the chief executive of the press club, Maurice Riley, canceled the event. The announcement of my talk disappeared from the website. Riley said that in the interest of balancing out our program, we will withdraw our offer. The Israeli ambassador, retired Lieutenant Colonel Amir Maimon, who spent 14 years in the Israeli military, is reportedly being considered to speak. It's true that I know only one side of the picture from the 7 years I spent covering Gaza. I was on the receiving end of Israeli attacks, including being bombed by its air force and fired upon by its snipers, one of whom killed a young man a few feet away from me at the Netzarim junction. We lifted him up, each person taking hold of an arm or a leg, and lumbered up the road as his body swayed like a heavy sack. I saw small boys baited and shot by Israeli soldiers in the Gaza refugee camp of Khan Yunis. The soldiers swore at the boys in Arabic over the loudspeakers of their armored jeep. The boys, about 10 years old, then threw stones at an Israeli vehicle, and the soldiers opened fire, killing some, wounding others. I was present more than once as Israeli troops shot Palestinian children. Such incidents, in the Israeli lexicon, became children caught in crossfire. I was in Gaza when F-16 attack jets bombed overcrowded hovels in Gaza City. I saw the corpses of the victims, including children. This became a surgical strike on a bomb-making factory. I have watched Israel demolish homes and entire apartment blocks to create wide buffer zones between the Palestinians and the Israeli troops that ring Gaza. I've interviewed the destitute and homeless families, some camped out in crude shelters erected in the rubble. The destruction becomes the demolition of the homes of terrorists. I've stood in the gutted remains of schools, as well as medical clinics and mosques, and counted the bodies. I've heard Israel claim that errant rockets or mortar fire from the Palestinians caused these and other deaths, or that the buildings were being used as arms depots or launching sites. I, along with every other reporter I know who has worked in Gaza, including the over 278 Palestinian journalists and media workers who have been killed by Israel since the start of the genocide, many in targeted assassinations, have reported a reality in Gaza that bears no resemblance to how it's portrayed by Israeli politicians, its military, and many media outlets that serve as Israel's echo chamber. Lieutenant Colonel Maimon can obviously, if he chooses, enlighten us about the artificial intelligence-based program known as Lavender and how it selects people, along with their families, in Gaza for assassination. He can explain how Israel determines the quotas of civilian dead, how soldiers are permitted to kill as many as 20 civilians in order to target a Palestinian fighter, and hundreds for a Hamas commander. He can let us know why Israel continues the mass slaughter when an internal Israeli intelligence database indicates that at least 83% of Palestinians killed are civilians. He can tell us how Palestinian civilians are abducted, dressed in Israeli army uniforms, have their hands tied, and are then forced to walk as human shields in front of Israeli troops into buildings and underground tunnels that are potentially booby-trapped. He can explain how the special unit called the Legitimization Cell carries out propaganda campaigns to portray Palestinian journalists as Hamas operatives to justify their assassinations. He can detail the targeting, bombing, and controlled demolitions that have damaged or destroyed 97% of Gaza's educational system, including every university and nearly all its hospitals. He can explain how, after Israel blocked all humanitarian aid on March 2nd to starve the Palestinians in Gaza, Israeli officials set up the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to lure emaciated and malnourished Palestinians to 4 aid hubs in the south, aid hubs with little food and which Human Rights Watch calls death traps and Doctors Without Borders calls orchestrated killing. These hubs, open only an hour, usually at 2 a.m., ensure a chaotic scramble for scraps of food. Israeli soldiers, along with U.S. mercenaries, who include members of the Infidels Motorcycle Club, a self-professed anti-radical jihadist biker group that counts members with crusader tattoos among its ranks, fire live rounds into the crowds, killing over 1,400 Palestinians and injuring thousands more in and around the hubs since May. He can lay out the plans for the concentration camps in southern Gaza and the efforts to ultimately expel the Palestinians from Gaza and repopulate it with Jewish colonists. He can explain why Israel abandoned its own hostages, why it fired on vehicles headed into the Gaza Strip on October 7th, carrying Israeli captives, and why it used Hellfire missiles to obliterate the Erez crossing installation when it was seized by Palestinian fighters, knowing that dozens of Israeli soldiers were inside. If Lieutenant Colonel Maimon spoke with this honesty and candor, we could call this balance. It would fill in a side of the equation I glimpse from the outside. It would complete the circle. It would match truth with truth. But Lieutenant Colonel Maimon, I see from his past statements, will spew out the mendacious narratives used by Israel to justify genocide. Hamas uses Palestinians as human shields. It operates command centers and hospitals. It sexually assaulted Israeli women on October 7th and beheaded babies. He'll make the spurious claim that Israel has the right to defend itself, ignoring the fact that Hamas and other Palestinian resistance groups, which lack an air force, mechanized units, artillery, a navy, fleets of militarized drones and missiles, pose no existential threat to Israel. More important, he will not address Israel's flagrant violation of international law by occupying and settling colonists on Palestinian land and carrying out a live-streamed genocide. This is not balance, unless we accept a world where truth is balanced by lies. It's an abandonment of the fundamental mission of journalists, to hold power accountable. But most egregiously, it's a terrible betrayal of our colleagues in Gaza who have been killed for chronicling the daily savagery in Gaza, for doing their job. No doubt, the corporate sponsors and wealthy donors of the press club are pleased. No doubt the club is able to slither away from its journalistic integrity. No doubt it is spared the attacks that would come from allowing me to speak. But please, have the decency to remove the word press from your club. That was the National Press Club of Australia, caving to the Israel lobby, cancels my talk on our betrayal of Palestinian journalists, written by Chris Hedges, read by Eunice Wong. For the Chris Hedges Report, chrishedges.substack.com.